Hi folks, you're with Tassus today at your Pushback channel, and thank you for joining this live stream. In this live chat, I'd like to talk about how the Christian church has come under withering attack and scorn, and how the state no longer seeks not only to not protect the Christian church, but is now actively involved in denigrating, shaming, humiliating the Christian church. And let's look at why that's happening and how it came to be, and why the left in particular, the political left, is so helpful to the globalists in achieving their objective of attacking Christians and attacking the Christian church. So let's sort of go back a little bit. When the Roman Empire disintegrated, it was Christianity that, to a large extent, held Europe together. There were little principalities, little fiefdoms, little dukedoms. So, this is before nation states really existed. There was the Holy Roman Empire and those sorts of configurations of multiple states. But that was certainly dynamic and was changing pretty much all the time. So the Catholic Church was really the only binding agent back in those days, and they kept that Christian sort of world somewhat together. They're also active in opposing the Islam in the form of the Moors from North Africa, and then the Ottoman Empire, the Turkish Ottoman Empire. So as the Islamic hordes were invading Europe through Spain, and then they're coming in through Greece and the Balkans and so on, it was primarily, or certainly they were a very big player in the game, it was the Christian church that was finding the money to fund the armies and the navies and so on that were opposing this. And if they hadn't done that, it's fairly reasonable to assume most of, if not all of, Central Europe and Eastern Europe would have been overrun by the Islamic hordes back in the day. So they certainly performed a role there. Now, did they do things that when we look back in history, for example, selling passports to heaven and the Spanish Inquisition and the witch trials, things like that they were involved in? They're not covered in glory throughout that entire period. Far from it. They did some dastardly things over time, and did also many good things. For example, they're ranging from the histories that were recorded, the keeping alive of Latin and ancient Greek, the academic and scholastic standards, even things like music. For example, the bass, particularly the treble clef and the bass clef in sheet music. That was pretty much an invention by the Catholic Church or those employed by them. If we look at some of the great works of art that today are revered, the Catholic Church had a big role in arts and culture and so on. But that's not what the issue is today. Religion, or particularly the Western Christian religion, it simply gets in the way of the globalist objective. Just another one of those things, like the family. It just gets in the way. It's an irritant. It's an annoyance, and it has to be got rid of, or crushed to a point of irrelevance. And either one, the globalists will be happy with. So they've let loose their leftist, Marxist foot soldiers and in the form of attack dogs, and said, go get them. And of course, as every Western government now is owned and controlled and directed and ordered about by the globalists, there's no sovereign governments anymore in the West. Then governments are told not to support the Christian church or Christianity. In fact, to perceive straight white people as Christians, or at least being sympathetic to Christian ideals, and thus they have to be crushed as well in the desperation of the globalists to impose their system on the West. And they're particularly interested, of course, just in the rich countries, which coincidentally happen to be Christian and happen to be white. So, but in modern terms, the Christian church has gone through, when communism and Marxism started to appear, there were and we're talking sort of really Marx and Engels, the Communist Manifesto. It was kind of around before then. Hegel was really talking about the early concepts of Marxism. But when you look at that, the 1850s through to the 1870s and beyond, when Marxism was being talked about in the coffee shops and by the bearded intellectuals of Europe and so on, then that was something that was a direct threat to the Catholic Church. And because part of the central tenet of a Marxist government was that the church was evil and had to be got rid of. So that was very much a Marxist thing. So unsurprisingly, the Catholics believed that Marxism was something that was not going to be a good thing for the Christianity in general, and of course the Catholic Church being a main and a primary player in that whole Christianity thing. So this was something that the church was very concerned about. The other side of it is there was a disproportionate number of Jews that were involved in Marxism in the day, and by the way, still now. If we look at the radical feminists of the 1960s and 70s, they were not all, but certainly 3/4 plus would have been Jewish, and many of those lesbians. So there was certainly a crossover between Marxism, or with Marxism, and with the amount of Jews. For example, not only was Karl Marx Jewish and his comrade Friedrich Engels Jewish, ironically a rich industrialist, but also if you look at the revolutions around, whether it be the Bolsheviks in Russia, there was certainly a heavy representation of Jews in that wider group. We look at the attempted the Spartacist revolution in Germany, that was again nearly all Jews, including Rosa Luxemburg, a Jewish lesbian, so a school teacher as well. That's an unusual combination. So there was that, and so the Catholic Church, in opposing Marxism, which they did, was also opposing, as certainly the Jews would have seen it, equality for Jews. So they would have been seen as anti-Jewish because they were anti-Marxist, and Marxist was very, very much seen by the Jews as a way of creating a world where they would never be persecuted again, and everybody would be equal, and there would be this utopia and so on. So the revolutionaries on one hand, and the Marxist intellectuals on the other, these were seen very much as threats to the Christianity and, of course, the Catholic Church. Now, the other thing that sort of fell into place, certainly from the perspective of the leftists, was that the Nazi government of Adolf Hitler was very tolerant of freedom of religion. So there was this freedom of religion thing that the Nazis permitted. They permitted worship, certainly Christian worship, and weren't necessarily supporting Christianity, but certainly were not against it, and they permitted that freedom of worship. So this was seen as that the Christians and the Nazis were in bed together, which was far from that. There were Christian ministers that were arrested and sent off to the camp. So that's not true. But again, the communists, by contrast, for example, in Soviet Russia, they didn't permit any sort of freedom of religion or freedom of worship, and actively attempted to undermine and destroy the Russian Orthodox Church in much the same way, and using many of the methodologies that we see today in the West to attack Christians and to undermine Christianity and Christian activity generally. So now, when Russia was being invaded in World War II, Stalin relaxed those restrictions on Christians in the hope of injecting some religious fervor into the defense of Russia, but quickly clamped down after that. But also the Russians were hardly, the communist Russians were hardly sympathetic towards the Jews as well. And Jews that still spoke and wrote and interacted in Yiddish, for example, which is the ancient Jewish language, is a European Jewish language, which is a sort of a form of upper class German, or Hochdeutsch as it's referred to, they were considered with much suspicion by the communists, and many of those were arbitrarily arrested and shipped off to gulags and so on in Russia. But that Nazi tolerance of Christianity in the Catholic Church, this was seen by Marxists as being the Christianity and Nazism were somehow together, which is of course untrue. So now the other thing that the Christian Church was against was those who supported Marxism, which I mentioned just a moment ago. This was something many of the Marxist activists and the Jewish revolutionaries, and not those people in that general sort of Marxist activist area, not only were many of them Jews, but many of them were also homosexuals and lesbians. So the church the Catholic Church was, in an effort to survive itself, was, if you like, had the profile that the Marxist revolutionaries, and bear in mind these people wanted to eradicate the church. These Marxist revolutionaries, they were going to be, a disproportionate number of them would be Jews, and a disproportionate number of them would be homosexuals and lesbians. So it was seen by that wider activist community that the church was opposing them, and they kind of took it personally, but it was opposing Marxism and the people that supported it, which just so happened to be homosexuals and lesbians and Jews and so on. So it came about that way. It wasn't an attack on those people, it was an attack on those who would support Marxism and did support it, who in turn threatened the church. So this created this. So let's fast forward now. This has left a bitter, simmering hatred by not only the Jewish community, but also Marxists, leftists, homosexuals, lesbians, and as these people sort of unite around the idea of this mythical utopia that's only around the next, like the unicorn, it's just around the next corner, just one more government regulation away, one more denunciation of a straight white male, and there we've got it in the bag. So when you look at these sorts of people, they're congregating around a hatred of the church, which is irrational and misplaced in the way that certainly they're putting it forward. And this bitter hatred, simmering hatred that's been around now for quite some time, that as people started to move towards consumerism, and there would have been a natural attrition anyway in Christianity as they moved towards this consumer society, then it didn't take much to jump into the void that was created and go after the Catholic Church. Now, again, the Catholic Church didn't cover themselves in glory here, or any church for that matter. And there were things like, the pedophile priests, which were very sad. I mean, some of these people had admitted and they fessed up that they committed these acts while they're wearing the cross of Jesus. I can't believe anybody would do that. But anyway, people had admitted and they fessed up that they committed these acts while they're wearing the cross of Jesus. I can't believe anybody would do that. But anyway, so maybe there was. Maybe the more senior people in the church were hoping that these folks would redeem themselves from their inappropriate behaviour through prayer and contrition and so on, and they moved around in the hope of that inappropriate behaviour through prayer and contrition and so on, and they moved around in the hope of that. But in the event, some of them just moved around and then offended again. So obviously troubled people, but nonetheless, so the church didn't cover itself in glory. So when these things started to come out, it was eagerly seized upon by the leftists and the globalists and the media they control, in order to really crush the Christian, a big influence over them. And they fell over themselves to try and appoint lesbian priests and homosexual bishops, and I mean, actually, they literally tore into and treated it as an ideological crusade to tear it to pieces and just denigrate it and turn it into just an irrelevant factor in everyone's lives. And they've certainly been quite successful in pursuing that. I don't think the amount of people who would attend church and those sorts of things, or Christian fellowship groups, I don't think Don't think there's as many there, or anywhere near as many as there may have been 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, and so on. So that the globalists and the left have certainly achieved, I would say, many, if not most, of their objectives. What they haven't achieved yet, which drives them insane, is that what underwrites our laws today, as in the initial bedrock of what the laws are founded on, things like the Ten Commandments, that sort of stuff, that's still around. And therefore people believe in, well, they may not be active Christians going to church or things like that. They believe directly, or probably indirectly, more than directly, they believe in the good Christian values. And that, again, that gets in the way of the globalists and gets in the way of what they're trying to impose on the West and us generally. So, and given that Christianity, certainly in the West, that is embraced by white people, then that's something that has to be crushed. Now, in the Protestant version of Christianity, in particularly the Protestant version of Christianity, if you look at where the Protestant Christianity went, then these tend to be the richest of the richest countries. So the United States, Britain, Germany, and the Nordic countries generally. So where the Protestant religion played a big part after Martin Luther and so on, where they played a big part, there was a direct relationship between the individual and God, and that relationship was meant to uphold God's values directly, rather than as they might be interpreted by a Catholic priest, for example. So being industrious, hardworking, prudent, not getting drunk or being dissolute, not gambling, and providing for your family as best you can. All these sorts of things are part of the wider fabric of what made the West rich, and other parts of the world not so. And disciplines contained in the religion, including things like self-sacrifice and so on, and also self-sacrifice for the common good. This is a very important part as well. These are the things that annoy and irritate the globalists today. And but if we look at, for example, that recent hoax in Canada about all those dead bodies, mass graves, and this sort of thing, and it was genocide, and it was this, and it was that, goddamn white supremacists, and hidden by the church, this sort of thing. The evidence to support that is very scant indeed, and I would say that they're using this as a propaganda device just to beat up on the church again. And some churches have been burned, for goodness sakes, and the police seem to be strangely reluctant, the government seems to be strangely reluctant to call it out. Or to condemn it, and the police seem very slow somehow in finding perpetrators and that sort of thing, suggesting that the states actually, the government controlled by the globalists, they're kind of okay with this. So if it's a disincentive for people to be Christian or to associate with Christianity or the church, then kind of that's a good thing, and we don't mind that. So a bit of propaganda, a bit of us, and hey, who cares? So those are the wider issues around, where things are today, and a bit of background to that. So hopefully that'll round out your understanding of these issues. You've been with Tacitus today at your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.